to Haunted Talks, the official podcast of the Haunted Walk, offering ghost tours and paranormal adventures in Kingston, Ottawa, and Toronto, Ontario. My name is Jim Dean. I am the creative director, and we really appreciate you joining us for today's show. Of all the professional sports, baseball seems to be the one most closely associated with the paranormal. There are famously haunted ballparks that connect current-day players and fans with the legends of the past. The Baseball Hall of Fame in Cooperstown, New York, has so many strange encounters that it has been featured on shows like Ghost Hunters. And baseball players themselves are a very superstitious bunch, going to extreme and odd lengths to try to give themselves an edge, or at least avoid bad luck, which seems to be always lurking around the diamond. Today, we are taking you to the ballgame, and we'll be sharing some of baseball's spookiest stories and the unique connections between the game and the paranormal. But before we get to that, if you have not yet joined us this summer for a ghost tour or paranormal adventure in Kingston, Ottawa, or Toronto, we certainly would like to invite you out for a safe and spooky night of fun. From our general city tours, which share the fascinating and dark aspects of local history, to our tours of specific sites, such as Black Creek Pioneer Village in Toronto, Fort Henry in Kingston, or the Mackenzie King Estate in Gatineau, Quebec, we have something for everyone. The weather has been fantastic for the past little while, beautifully starry evenings, and even some reports of seeing the Perseids meteor shower. And if you want to try your hand at being a paranormal investigator, we will be partnering with Phantoms of Yore for investigations this weekend, August 20th and 21st, at the Lost Villages Museum in Long Sault, Ontario, and then on August 27th and 28th at the Martintown Mill. For information about any of our tours or public paranormal investigations, please visit our website, which is hauntedwalk.com. If you're listening from outside of our geographical area, check out our online experiences, including our Haunting at Home and our virtual haunted campfires. Be sure to follow us on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, and recently, now on TikTok, all four of them at Haunted Walk. Also be sure to subscribe and rate the show wherever you listen to us. One of my first loves was baseball. I used to play every summer growing up. I can still hear the sound of my cleats on the gravel infield, the smack of the ball into the catcher's mitt, the crack of the bat, the chatter of my teammates, and the sounds of crickets chirping away in the outfield grass as the moon hung low in the night sky. My older brother and sister also played, so our family would spend a lot of time at various baseball diamonds all across southern Ontario. Last weekend, I received a very short and unexpected voicemail from my mom saying, "The Field of Dreams game is about to start. You should watch." This was a special game that Major League Baseball held on the grounds of the famous Iowa cornfield, where the 1989 movie Field of Dreams, starring Kevin Costner, was filmed. It is one of my absolute favorite movies and holds a really special spot in the hearts of our family. And if you haven't seen it, whether you're a baseball or sports fan or not, I highly recommend it. It is very much a ghost story, as baseball players from the past begin to materialize from out of a cornfield, as if they had never died or gotten old. On a deeper level, The film is about the things that truly haunt us. The complicated relationships between fathers and sons. The strength and challenges of being a member of a family. How to live with ourselves when our dreams don't quite come true. The importance and the continuity of the traditions that bind us together. And ultimately, that there is enough magic in the world to never give up hope. It is a powerful and beautiful film. The Field of Dreams game was a huge success and drew the largest audience for a regular season Major League Baseball game since 2005. And befitting the special magic of this ballpark cut into a cornfield, the game featured an action-packed ninth inning, which ended in the most dramatic way possible, a walk-off home run in the bottom of the ninth. When I decided we had to do an episode about baseball and the paranormal, I knew I had to reach out to a very special co-host. She has a very familiar voice and face for those of you who follow us at the Haunted Walk. She's been a tour guide, a host, a researcher, a writer, has a PhD in history, and of all my friends, she is the one most likely to post a picture of herself at a baseball game. Brittney Bos, welcome to Haunted Talks.
Thank you very much. I am so excited to be here to talk about one of my favorite sports and one of my favorite subjects, the paranormal.
Do you have a baseball film that you would like to recommend to our audience?
Absolutely. You already mentioned Field of Dreams, which is definitely one of my favorites, but my all-time favorite baseball movie is definitely A League of Their Own.
There's no crying in baseball!
And a few years ago, I had the absolute pleasure to meet some of the real-life women that this movie was based on. So although it was my favorite before, now it's even more of my favorite, having met these inspirational figures. Definitely one of my top films of all time, A League of Their Own, and they're just about to make an Amazon series about it as well.
Oh, really? I didn't know that. And the film is with Tom Hanks, Madonna, Rosie O'Donnell, I seem to recall.
Yes, that's the one.
Oh, excellent. That's a great film as well. I appreciate that recommendation, and definitely another one our audience should check out. But let's move, shall we, to more of the spookier side of baseball. And I wonder where you think we should begin, looking kind of at the history of baseball. Where's a good place to kind of start?
I think we should start at the beginning and consider where the paranormal and baseball might intersect in some of its earlier history. Let's start there.
All right, let's do it. Is there a first example you'd like to share that kind of got the ball rolling for you in thinking about this topic?
Well, surprisingly, or perhaps not, I found a ton of examples of the intersection of the paranormal and baseball. But I must say, one of the most intriguing initial finds is the story of John Fetzer. So he was the owner of the Detroit Tigers for nearly 2 decades, and he actually led the franchise to a World Series title in 1968. Well, Fetzer was actually a secret spiritualist, and he partially credited the World Series win to his beliefs and practices.
I can't help but note that he sounds an awful lot like one of our other favorite historical figures to explore, which is William Lyon Mackenzie King, kind of a secret spiritualist as well, who had all sorts of, bizarre and interesting habits. And of course, we give tours of the Mackenzie King estate at Gatineau Park throughout the summer and into the fall. But as for John Fetzer, please don't tell me he was using a Ouija board to make baseball decisions?
Absolutely. He definitely was. He actually used the classic tools of spiritualists. So like Mackenzie King, he used things like Ouija boards, dowsing rods, psychics, seances, all of these different items to aid him in decision making. And indeed, that included choices that supposedly led to his World Series victory for his team. So, although he didn't tell people at the time about his spiritualist side, it was pretty well documented that he used these techniques to guide his managerial role. And, well, I guess it worked.
Well, using guidance from beyond isn't all that strange when you consider the collection of superstitions that baseball players seem to have. I mean, how many players insist on having the same meals or going to the same places before every game? Others break out special clothing, like their favorite undergarments or different colored socks. Others pick or even name their equipment, selecting certain things for certain times in the game. And these aren't all minor leaguers you've never heard of. These are some big names, idols past and present, people who won MVP titles and major awards, members of the Hall of Fame. And the superstitions don't stop there.
They certainly don't. Now, one of my favorite parts of any baseball season, and this just happened recently, by the way, has to be when some random cat comes out of nowhere and runs on the field. Now, there's a few particularly famous incidents, but it seems year after year after year, there are more of these to add to the list. Well, it actually turns out that many baseball players are incredibly superstitious when it comes to cats running on the field, especially if they happen to be black cats. Now, some teams and players, notably the St. Louis Cardinals, for example, have a lucky rally cat. They embrace the presence of these feline friends and see it as a sign of good luck. But other players refuse to touch or go near a random stray. And one of my favorite things is when they run away from it, not for fear of rabies or something like that, but for fears of bad luck.
Well, I know, Brittney, you have two black cats, and we've had black cats as well, and I think we can agree. There's no way black cats are bad luck. More like good luck, I would say, because we've certainly enjoyed having them. But I'm guessing that cats at ballparks may actually be welcomed, sort of like in Disney World or Disneyland, where they also have some mouse-catching duties that they're required to fulfill.
I would think so. I've always wanted to witness one of those cat incidents in person. I've actually seen plenty of animals at other sporting events. I've seen rabbits at football games, but no cats yet. Still waiting for that one. And it isn't just animals, though, by the way. I've seen plenty of players in person jump over lines, complete a ritual before throwing out a first pitch, write something in the dirt, wait for something to happen before they run off the field, sometimes waiting until the very last moment. And some players insist that certain things at certain games or at certain times are omens of some sort. Some players will even watch for these occurrences and take them as a sign of good or bad luck.
I have to think back to my own baseball playing days, and it's absolutely true. Every time I would come off the field, I would, take a little hop over the foul line. Now, I don't know if anyone ever told me what the ramifications were for doing that, but that's a superstition I did for, 12, 13 years when I played baseball growing up. And I think it's interesting we don't know the root of some of these superstitions, but there are lots of them. And we've talked about movies about ghosts in baseball. So I guess we shouldn't be surprised that baseball players have had some notable experiences with the paranormal.
Absolutely not. We shouldn't be surprised. But in the end, as I was researching this topic, I was actually very shocked to see the breadth and vastness of all of the experiences. Now, just to be clear before we get into some more examples, I only looked at American sites when I was considering this. But I have a feeling that there's many other baseball venues in different countries that probably have the same storied past of paranormal encounters and players from all over the world who would have these experiences. When you start delving into baseball and the paranormal, I must say some surprising places actually start to emerge.
So we have the haunted stadiums, and of course the haunted Hall of Fame, both of which we'll get to in a little bit. But one of the most common connections between the paranormal and baseball is actually found in hotels. And I think that makes a lot of sense because baseball players spend a lot of time on the road, visiting the same hotels over and over again. And as all of our regular listeners know, hotels are notorious for being haunted. No matter the age or location, it seems every hotel has a constantly growing list of unexplained encounters.
During my research, I actually found numerous hotels, both in the majors and minor leagues, that have a reputation for being haunted. But the name that kept coming up again and again and again was the Pfister Hotel in Milwaukee. Now, it's known in the baseball world and far beyond as an incredibly haunted spot with new activity reported regularly. And yes, many people having those encounters are Major League Baseball players who happen to be in town playing the Milwaukee Brewers. The hotel dates from 1893, looks absolutely stunning from the photos online. I haven't had the pleasure of going in, but it has an elaborate lobby and decadent dining rooms. And this hotel hit its peak in the early 20th century. Unfortunately, it was saved a few times from financial ruin over the years. It's still one of the poshest places to stay in the Midwest. It's on my bucket list now, if you don't mind the spirits. It has been named one of the most haunted hotels in the United States and one of the most haunted places in Wisconsin.
The most common encounter for players staying at the hotel is waking up in the middle of the night with the distinct impression that someone is in the room. Others hear the sounds of footsteps or stomping around while they're in bed. Others feel an uneasy presence lurking somewhere in the darkness. A few have said that the door to the room has suddenly opened and a gentle breeze has wafted through the room. Others, most notably MVP Bryce Harper, have slept through the encounter but have woken up to find their possessions strewn about the room. Now, Brittney, when I read that and I tried to put myself in that position, if I had gone to sleep with everything in my suitcase and woke up the next morning with all my items strewn about the room, I don't think there's any way I could stay another night. That would be a terrifying experience.
Absolutely. That was my first reaction as well. And just to be clear, the 2015 National League MVP came forward with that story. That's how notorious this place is. And its reputation is well known amongst visiting clubs. And you and I, Jim, wouldn't be alone in saying we wouldn't stay there, because some players have reportedly refused to stay there after hearing about some of these encounters. Now, another common occurrence that we often see at other haunted spots or hear about are electronic malfunctions. So at the Fetzer Hotel, radios have suddenly turned on, computers have gone all glitchy, lights have flashed on and off. Others very vividly describe sleepless nights, discomfort, and even absolute terror just upon entering through those doors. It did make me think, as a baseball fan, if maybe the Brewers are getting a really unfair advantage here due to all of those terrified opposing players.
I think this is a great point, and so much of baseball is about statistics. I wonder if we could come up with statistics about how teams do after staying at notoriously haunted hotels. That would be a very interesting mathematical study, I think. Now, of course, these stories aren't confined to Major League Baseball players. Other members of the public have had their own fair share of encounters at the hotel. People have woken up to see a shadowy figure or figures standing in the doorways of their rooms. In another incident, an automatic door was captured on film, opening and closing, all on its own.
Right, so I think that's an important point. It isn't just Major League Baseball players who are seeing and hearing these weird things, or else I would absolutely suspect a Brewers fan from the hotel to be at fault. But it seems that the paranormal legends at the hotel go back many years. The first Major League Baseball player to go on record was about 20 years ago, from what I could find. Adrian Beltre, who said his electronics were going on and off throughout his stay, and he said there was also a strange knocking sound at his door that had no clear source.
For the past 2 decades, the legend has continued to grow, and more names have been added to this list. Michael Young, an infielder who played for the Texas Rangers, Philadelphia Phillies, and Los Angeles Dodgers, heard footsteps and stomping around one night. An anonymous Pittsburgh Pirates player had his TV suddenly go on. Pitcher C.J. Wilson, who also played for Texas and Philadelphia, had his lights flicker. Carlos Gomez, an outfielder who played for several teams, had his iPod unexpectedly turn on. But perhaps one of the most vivid experiences comes from Ji-Man Choi, a first baseman currently with the Tampa Bay Devil Rays, who claims he saw so many ghosts at the hotel, it doesn't bother him anymore. In one instance, a misty figure even hovered over his bed in the middle of the night.
I don't know how Choi can no longer feel disturbed by that presence.
That's just too confident. That's way too confident for me.
Way too much. Maybe he knows something. He did actually play for the Milwaukee Brewers for a time, so perhaps he got some insight into who the ghost might be. But us here at the Haunted Walk, we're not too sure. So if you followed us a lot, you know that we love to try and figure out who the ghosts or ghosts could be. Now, the most likely candidate that I can see from research and discussions online is Charles Pfister or someone in his family. So there was the father, Guido Pfister, who built the family fortune and died right before the hotel was opened. Isn't that classic ghost story fodder? But the strong candidate is the aforementioned Charles Pfister, the adopted son, who poured much of his heart and soul into this hotel. Still, 2 excellent possibilities for the spirit described by people as the good-natured elderly man who helps guests and watches over his kingdom.
But that doesn't sound quite like the terrifying encounters that many baseball players have described in their rooms, unless the Pfisters were Brewers fans intent on giving the home side an advantage. However, there aren't any other great candidates, it seems. It's a hotel, meaning many people have passed through the doors and some inevitably have died there, but the identity of this very active spirit, or spirits, seems largely a mystery.
And as I considered this question, I kind of think the ghost has to be connected to baseball in some way. I mean, other members of the public have encounters there, but the hotel has such a reputation for baseball players in particular, so much that some refuse to stay there, and others have blamed their poor performances on the field on the ghosts. There's got to be something there, and something tells me there is a connection with baseball somehow.
It's very interesting, and of course the Pfister isn't the only haunted hotel that professional athletes stay in. To veer into one of my other favorite sports for a moment, basketball, the Skirvin Hotel in Oklahoma City has a very dark reputation, with similar stories coming from Thunder opponents who refuse to even walk through the front doors of the building.
That's a great story, Jim. But remember, this is a podcast about baseball.
Oh, pardon me.
Talk about basketball another time. I'm going to veer us back to baseball and talk about the St. Francis Hotel in San Francisco. And this is where players often stay when playing the Oakland A's. Players have had terrifying encounters in the elevators, which are known to do strange things like go up and down on their own, refuse to open their doors, the like. Some have actually seen ghostly figures enter the elevators, while others have encountered a female spirit who is said to walk the halls. I think we could make an entire podcast series on haunted hotels and professional athletes. It seems to be quite the running theme. But how about we go in a slightly different direction and talk about haunted ballparks? If you think those storied Major League Baseball parks filled with history have to be occupied by their fair share of spirits, then you're absolutely right. I looked at many different ballparks and found that most of them have some strange stories attached. While newer parks also have their fair share of tales, I found the historic parks are always the most fascinating. Those ghosts seem linked to that place for eternity.
It's interesting you say that, because my immediate thought when you mentioned haunted ballparks was that many of the parks, of course, have been replaced over the years. And if we look broader into history, we would say the sites of very important or tragic or bloody historic events also don't remain, but somehow maybe a piece of them does. I mean, what happened to the ghosts of old Yankee Stadium when it was closed and replaced by a newer facility?
Well, to be fair, in that case, they didn't have to go too far. They just had to go down the block. They're still in the Bronx. But it's a fascinating question that is often asked in paranormal circles more generally. You mentioned other historic sites. So if the spirits are perhaps tied to a certain activity, in this case, baseball, do they follow the activity and the players to the new location? Or do they stay tied to the original building that no longer has that activity? I'm posing these questions here, but they've actually been posed in online discussions and elsewhere when the new Yankee Stadium opened. And people are still pondering that question today, probably because Yankee Stadium, at least the old one, was known for its spirits of players past.
Reading about some of the sightings at old Yankee Stadium reminded me very much of Field of Dreams. Long after games were over, it is said the ghosts of Yankee players would walk the field. But most of the stories about Yankee Stadium aren't about the strange noises or shadowy figures that we're used to hearing about in ghost stories. It's that distinct and clear feeling of being watched, but in a good way. Many players over the years have firmly believed that they were watched by former stars, and even credit victories to the spirits. I mean, the Yankees have won the most World Series of any franchise, so maybe the ghosts did help?
I think Yankee players would say that the ghosts have definitely helped, because if you know baseball, you've probably heard the phrase, the ghosts of Yankee Stadium. And when people say that phrase, they're not just talking about the ghostly encounters people have had, but the weight of so many Yankee greats watching over the games. It's a storied place and a franchise, so that's no real surprise, but the attention and credit that these ghosts are given is actually really unique. Mickey Mantle, another famous Yankee, talked at length about the ghost of Babe Ruth watching over him. And more recently, star Derek Jeter flippantly remarked that he wants to become a Yankee ghost someday. And he was serious. Call it a good luck charm or a curse to the opposing side, the Yankee ghosts appear to live on.
And there may even be Yankee ghosts elsewhere. Many of you are probably familiar with the curse of the Bambino. Folklore surrounding the long drought of the Boston Red Sox winning a World Series, over 80 years in fact, before it was broken, reportedly was tied to the sale of Babe Ruth, who went on to lead the hated Yankees to World Series victories. Some believe that the curse was manifested through the paranormal, and Ruth could actually be seen walking around Fenway, the home of the Red Sox, at night.
Just as you said that, I got some shivers thinking of what it would be like to be a Red Sox fan, imagining one of your enemies walking around your field. Now, there's actually many stories from grounds crews, security guards, and others who are around Fenway after the stadium lights have dimmed. They've seen shadowy figures walking through the field. They've heard the voices of former players, including Babe Ruth. Probably the creepiest thing are the disembodied wails coming from the Green Monster, that huge wall in the outfield that's notoriously difficult for home run hitters. Or maybe even more hauntingly is the hum of fans cheering when everyone has gone home. That's, as a baseball fan, is a little much to imagine.
Yeah, that's creepy, but speaking of voices, one of the most iconic voices in baseball, the PA announcer for the Sox for nearly 30 years, Sherm Feller, might still be hanging around Fenway Park today. His baritone voice is recognizable for any old-time Red Sox fan, and he's reportedly still heard throughout the stadium. Others have seen his ghostly figure in the broadcast booth, maybe hoping to call one more game.
When we think about haunted ballparks, we immediately maybe think of players, but broadcasters are actually a frequent figure in these stories, and you telling me about Sherm Feller reminded me of another famous sportscaster, Carey, who reportedly still haunts Wrigley Field. So for those of you unaware, Wrigley Field is the home of the Chicago Cubs, and one of those storied baseball parks that's been around for over a century. The Cubs suffered a similar curse to the Red Sox, actually, but that was broken a few years ago with a very dramatic World Series win. Anyways, Carey is known as a legendary voice for the Cubs, but even if you're not a Chicago fan, I think you've probably heard his voice before.
I have indeed, and that's because he sings probably the most famous rendition of Take Me Out to the Ballgame, complete with a video of him in his distinctive, huge black-rimmed glasses. He's also known as the Major of Rush Street.
Yes, that's the guy. An iconic baseball moment captured in perpetuity. When I visited Wrigley Field a few years ago, I was unaware of his legendary status. I had heard his rendition before, but I was rather baffled by the love of this old video that was shown during the 7th inning stretch. So Carey, like Sherm Feller in Boston, reportedly haunts the broadcast booth and other places throughout Wrigley Field. His very distinctive voice, recognizable to every Cubs fan and many baseball fans, is heard by security guards, night crew, players, staff. He's everywhere. Not a threatening presence. Many actually feel comforted by this famous broadcaster.
The Major of Rush Street isn't alone at Wrigley Field, though. In fact, the place seems filled with spirits of all kinds, including an iconic player and manager. Charlie Grimm was a first baseman and later a manager of the Cubs, who spent over 20 years in total with the team. I don't think Grimm retired, as apparently he likes to call in pitching changes whenever he feels like it, causing the Wrigley Field phones to ring off the hooks at all hours. His spirit is also known to pace the hallways and even call out people's names.
But why Grimm, might you ask? Does he have some unfinished business out on the field? Well, maybe. He didn't break the Billy Goat curse, after all. But it could also be because his remains are at Wrigley Field in a special box.
This seems so wild to me, but Grimm's aren't the only remains at Wrigley. Keep in mind, fans often request to have their loved one's ashes spread at the storied ballpark, And of course, others do it without asking, much like happens on the Haunted Mansion at Disney. At Wrigley in particular, Steve Goodman, a superfan and songwriter known for the official chant of the Cubs, had his ashes spread on the field following his death.
It's no surprise then that his ghost is frequently spotted in his former seat. And I really hope that Steve Goodman was there when the curse was finally broken. Wrigley Field is a magical place, and you have so many reasons to go there. Take my word for it. But perhaps the potential for these ghostly sightings gives you another reason to check it out sometime.
I am very jealous that you've been there. Between Wrigley and Fenway, which is the other historical park I would absolutely love to go to. I'm trying not to be too jealous, but I definitely am a little bit. Now, I know we're focused on the major leagues for this episode, but I don't think we can talk about haunted ballparks and forget perhaps one of the most haunted sports venues in the United States. Frontier Field in Rochester, New York, home of the Rochester Red Wings, a AAA affiliate of the Minnesota Twins.
I must say, I was very surprised when I came across this field as a supposedly very haunted spot. The ghosts of Yankee Stadium might be one of the most famous paranormal sports venue phrases of all time, and Wrigley may have a fair collection of spirits, but Frontier Field is in a class of its own when it comes to the paranormal. What a collection of stories this place has.
There was a pretty notable investigation done there in 2004, and many have happened since. All have captured some pretty strange stuff, including some eerie pictures and recordings. Investigators seem to leave convinced that there are multiple spirits present. Most very friendly, but some notoriously aggressive. The freight elevator has been heard operating on its own, and loud noises come from the hallways when everyone else has left. Some noted skeptics on staff have completely changed their opinion after encountering shadowy figures in the stadium when they have been completely alone.
Now, I don't necessarily believe that crows are attached to spirits or the paranormal, but I admit getting a bit terrified when I read that a roost of crows appears every January and February and eerily watches over the stadium, constantly cawing. Very Alfred Hitchcock.
Yeah, that's pretty unsettling. And there definitely seems to be something going on. Not only do you have witnesses to some really strange activity, but you also have numerous investigators finding some odd things and even officially declaring the ballpark to be haunted.
That's what's really weird about this ballpark in particular, is that there is no immediate explanation for all of this ghostly activity. The park was constructed in the 1990s, and it really isn't connected to any baseball folklore the same way Fenway or Yankee Stadium or Wrigley Field is. In fact, it's a pretty normal ballpark, connected to a pretty standard AAA team. There are rumors it was maybe built on top of an old burial ground, and a warehouse that once stood on the site burned down right before the construction of the stadium. There were a few historic buildings which occupied the site over the years, including a school, but nothing really sticks out. I'm wondering if there is something more to this story and these hauntings than we know.
It really does feel like there must be. For so much activity to be concentrated in one place, there's usually some kind of historical link. And maybe they're just waiting to be found. If we have any listeners in Rochester, of course, we want you to get on the case right away.
Please do, because I definitely want to know what's going on at this place. And I tend to think that maybe that's why it is so active, because it's waiting to be found. There is something or someone attached to the site that we don't know about, and it's clamoring for attention. It wants us to look into it. So please, go off, find out. Now, in contrast, there is a site that we know a lot about, and it probably explains why there is so much potential paranormal activity attached to it: the Baseball Hall of Fame at Cooperstown.
Now, Hall of Fames, of course, where the best players are enshrined after outstanding careers. They really seem to be on trend, don't they?
They sure do. And honestly, while doing research on the hauntings at the Baseball Hall of Fame, I couldn't help coming across the Hockey Hall of Fame in Toronto, which is famously featured on the original Haunted Walk of Toronto. And I mean, stories of the Hockey Hall of Fame were everywhere. This research has really solidified my conviction that the Hockey Hall of Fame in Toronto must be one of the most haunted sports-related venues in all of North America.
Ooh, that's kind of like throwing down the gauntlet, but I think you have a strong case, and certainly it's a story we love sharing. I won't even tease what it's about here, but on the original Haunted Walk, we love telling that story. But the Baseball Hall of Fame is located in Cooperstown, New York, and is a pretty fascinating place, even without the ghosts. It was established and constructed in 1939 as a Hall of Fame and is probably the most famous sports museum in the world.
I have yet to take a trip to Cooperstown, but it is on my list because a lot of baseball fans take dedicated journeys to Cooperstown specifically to see the Hall of Fame, the building, all of its contents. It's legendary in the sport of baseball, probably because of its long history. It's been around for a very long time, and there's a very select and rather small number of inductees that make it a truly special place. I do have to wonder if all Hall of Fames are destined to be haunted, though. And if so, I really can't wait to tell the stories about the future Women's Baseball Museum, which is currently collecting funding for a spot in Rockford, Illinois, where professional women's baseball players, so like those featured in a league of their own, may stick around to tell us their unique stories about their fascinating past.
Oh, great point.
Anyways, it should be no surprise that there are hauntings at Cooperstown. Think about it. You have a game that is intricately linked with ghosts and spirits of the past. And then you have a building housing items used by these people to accomplish incredible things. If the spirits of baseball players watch over Yankee Stadium, surely they must watch over their treasured belongings at the Hall of Fame.
That's a fairly convincing argument, and I guess so many others were certain about its haunted nature that it attracted the attention of the television show Ghost Hunters. Now, their investigation uncovers a few possibilities, but nothing absolutely definitive. If you're a fan of paranormal investigations, you know a lack of evidence at one particular investigation doesn't mean that a place isn't haunted. In fact, other investigations have had rather vivid experiences at the hall.
Exactly. And added to the investigation evidence, there is a never-ending list of encounters that visitors and staff have reported, centered around a few key spots in the museum.
One of those places is the Plaque Gallery, which displays the images and accomplishments of the over 300 inductees. Many people have reported hearing whispers and voices coming through. In fact, a whispering sound at the Plaque Gallery is one of the things captured by ghost hunters, although the actual content is unclear in their recording. Some believe that the voices are people who have had their plaques featured on the walls, such as Ty Cobb, a rather big personality in early baseball, and another great baseball film, Cobb, starring Tommy Lee Jones. Others think it's people who have been kept out of the hall. Perhaps even Shoeless Joe Jackson, whose continued exclusion for betting is still a source of controversy.
I just can't stop thinking of that moment. Imagine you're this huge baseball fan. You're there looking at this plaque gallery, which from the online pictures looks absolutely stunning. You're reading about your favorite baseball heroes, and suddenly you hear their voice being whispered from beyond. It had me wondering why. Why are these voices attached to these plaques? Is it because they're celebrating their accomplishments or lamenting their exclusion? I really wish we had a better sense of what they're whispering. Are they giving advice? Are they gloating? Are they disappointed? Maybe this is where the Field of Dreams gets its inspiration for that whispering.
It definitely sounds like there's a need for future investigations to take place there. But you mentioned the idea of giving advice, and that's one of my favorite ghost stories about the Hall. There's a well-known display that shows Ted Williams, one of the greatest hitters, the greatest batters ever to play the game. And it shows his strike zone, basically explaining the science of waiting for a good pitch to hit, just as the famous hitter used to do when he was practicing. Many people are drawn to this display, and while examining it, some will hear commentary from Ted Williams himself on how to hit the baseball. However, there are no recorded voices or any advice they hear to claim it's not coming from the Hall of Fame. There are no hidden speakers, there is no setup. So perhaps Ted Williams is providing guidance that the museum had never intended.
I'm still not sure how I would react to that. I mean, if you play baseball, you have no choice but to follow the advice of Ted Williams. But I don't know how I would react to hearing his voice suddenly from beyond. In this same area that is of the Ted Williams strike zone display, the ghost hunter investigators also saw a shadowy figure. In fact, those shadowy figures have been spotted throughout the building, and visitors are often astonished when they suddenly disappear down a corridor or around a corner.
Now, it's not just the visitors to the museum who hear and see these things, it's also the staff who work there. Security guards often have the most ghostly encounters at any site. I've heard footsteps, doors opening and closing, other unexplained noises when they're completely alone in the building. But like any museum, it is also the interpretive staff who have had their fair share of encounters.
Yes, and this is a very vivid story recorded in the online source, The Hardball Times, about something that happened to a staff member named Christina. Now, one night she was closing up a gallery space, and it featured a number of pictures on the walls. Jokingly, she said good night to the paintings. And without missing a beat, a voice from beyond said, "Good night, Christina." But that's not all. She had another encounter later that year in the same area. She was closing up the museum and saw someone standing in the corner. After alerting them that the museum was closing shortly and they had to leave, she turned her head for just a moment. And when she looked back, the figure was gone. That same thing happened to another staff member in the exact same spot later that year.
I do think if you work at a notoriously haunted spot and you yell out good night to empty rooms, you're kind of asking for it. And
I agree.
Well, with such a long list of stories, clearly more research needs to be done. There's certainly something going on there. But baseball ghosts appear in other places too, not just venues connected to their beloved sport.
That makes so much sense. If baseball players are haunting their former parks and they're also at the Hall of Fame, why not other places too?
Right, so there's the story of Eddie Plank, one of the first left-handed pitchers to attain many accolades, including winning over 300 games. Well, years after his death, many people believe Plank still wanted to pitch. In the summer of 1996, the owner of Plank's old home in Gettysburg frequently heard the sound of a few small steps, a grunt, and a thud, over and over and over again. Some calculating folks timed the interval between the grunt and the thud, did some physics work, and found it matched the time it took for a baseball to go from the pitcher's mound across home plate. That strange sequence of sounds continued throughout the baseball season, but then suddenly stopped when the season ended.
Overall, there really is no shortage of stories involving the paranormal and baseball. In fact, there are entire books dedicated to this subject, and they barely scratch the surface. Haunted Baseball is one of these books, and my personal favorite title, Field of Screams. There are blog posts, discussion boards, and plenty of internal gossip amongst baseball players about hauntings and their own odd encounters. Add these stories to the very long list of curses and superstitions and oddities that seem to surround baseball and its folklore, and you have something truly special.
It certainly has been a fun topic to explore. I know I'll never watch baseball the same way again. I'll be constantly thinking about those superstitions, seeing if I can notice what the players are doing on the field. But also, all of these ghosts that apparently haunt these ballparks, and the legends of the past that live on and want to keep playing their favorite game.
I must add, researching this subject has given me a lot of extra comfort that if my team has a bad game out there on the field, I'm just going to throw my hands up and blame it on the ghosts. Seems like a completely legitimate excuse now.
Yes, it does. Brittney, thank you so much for joining us on the episode and sharing some of your favorite baseball ghost stories. And I look forward to seeing you out at the ballpark.
Well, thank you very much for having me.
And thank you for joining us. Be sure to visit our website, hauntedwalk.com, to learn all about our ghost tours and paranormal adventures happening all across Ontario. As always, a special thanks to our Haunted Talks team, including our outstanding audio editor, Michelle Dennis, and Kevin McLeod at incompetech.filmmusic.io for the additional music. Full credits available on our website. Be sure to follow us on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, and recently, now on TikTok, all four at Haunted Walk. And be sure you subscribe to the show wherever you listen to us so you know when the new episode comes out. And we're always appreciative, and be sure to read every single review. Until we meet again, sweet dreams.